There's something quietly breaking in Canada. Not in headlines, not in election slogans, but in kitchens, in basements, on sidewalks, in the places where real life happens, and where the cost of survival is rising by the day. Just a few years ago, a modest two-bedroom in Toronto rented for $2,400. Now, try $3,300. And buying? Forget it. In Vancouver and Toronto, you'd need to earn double or even triple the median income just to qualify for a mortgage. That's not a housing market. That's a blockade. We explored how Canada, one of the world's wealthiest nations, is facing a full-scale housing emergency, where rent surges outpace wages, where tent cities rise beside million-dollar condos, where even the middle class can no longer afford to live. The dream of homeownership? It's vanishing. For Gen Z, for new immigrants, for working families. Canada isn't just in a housing crisis, it's in a crisis of belonging, and it doesn't stop at rent. In first episode, we stepped into the aisles of your local grocery store, where everyday Canadians are forced to choose between lunch and light bills. Groceries are up, gas is up, cell phone bills, rent, tuition, all up. But wages? Flat. We uncovered a hidden Canada, one where students sleep in cars, seniors skip meals, full-time workers still qualify for food aid, where personal debt is normalized, and financial anxiety is now a national mental health crisis. But the most disturbing truth? The economy is growing. Government numbers say things are fine. Yet ask the people, and they'll tell you, this isn't growth, it's survival. So what's really going on? Because this isn't just a housing story. It's not just an economic story. It's a story about what it means to live in Canada and who gets to thrive here. And as we move into Chapter 3, we'll explore the third rail of the national debate: immigration. Its history, its promise, its pressure, and how a nation of immigrants is now grappling with its own limits. This is Canada, explained. Not as it was promised, but as it is lived. Canada is a country built by immigrants. That's not a slogan, it's a fact. From the wheat fields of Saskatchewan to the factories of Ontario, the mines of Quebec to the tech hubs of British Columbia, newcomers built this country. Not just in sweat and labor, but in culture, in knowledge, in family. Every generation of Canadians has been shaped by immigration. And for decades, that system was admired worldwide, seen as a model of balance, fairness, and inclusion. But in this year, something has changed. Public trust is eroding. People are asking harder questions. Can Canada handle this pace of immigration? Is there enough housing, healthcare, infrastructure to keep up? And how did a country so proud of welcoming newcomers begin to question them? To understand what immigration means to Canada, we have to go back. In the 1800s, immigration was used as a tool to expand westward, populate the prairies, fuel agriculture, and establish control over land. Posters were sent across Europe. Build your future in the New World. Trains brought settlers. Indigenous peoples were displaced. From the beginning, immigration in Canada was both a dream and a strategy. In the 20th century, Canada moved toward a merit-based system, introducing a points model in the 1960s that ranked immigrants by education, language, and skills. That model, still in use today, helped transform the economy. From post-war labor shortages to modern tech revolutions, immigration fueled growth. By 2018, two-thirds of Canadians said immigration was good for the country. It was a rare political consensus, left and right united. So what changed? In recent years, immigration has become a solution to new problems: a shrinking workforce, an aging population, chronic labor shortages. Canada's birth rate is now 1.4 children per woman, far below replacement. By 2036, there will be more seniors than children for the first time in history. Immigration, once a long-term strategy, became an urgent fix. Targets rose: 465,000 new permanent residents in 2023, 485,000 in 2024, 500,000 in 2025. And that's not counting international students, temporary workers, asylum claimants. In 2024, total newcomers may surpass 1.3 million people. The goal? Grow fast, stay competitive, solve shortages. But what if the system couldn't keep up? The promise of immigration is still real. But the infrastructure of that promise, housing, transit, social services, recognition of foreign credentials, is breaking under pressure. And when people feel the system is overwhelmed, they start looking for someone to blame. That's how a story of hope becomes a story of backlash. It didn't begin with hate, it began with a question. Can we keep up? And as Chapter 3 unfolds, we'll explore that question in depth. Not to point fingers, but to understand the truth behind the tension and how immigration became Canada's most fragile political fault line. Do you think Canada's immigration system still works? What does immigration mean to you? Opportunity, challenge, or both? Drop a comment below. Like and subscribe to join us as we continue this story. What happens when a good idea is pushed too far, too fast? That's what many Canadians are now asking about immigration. Not because they've become less welcoming, but because the numbers changed faster than the system could respond. In the last 3 years, Canada opened its doors wider than ever before. Permanent resident targets were raised to 500,000 per year. Temporary foreign worker programs were expanded. International student visas surged to over 1 million active permits. And by 2024, Canada welcomed more than 1.3 million newcomers in a single year. That's the fastest population growth in modern Canadian history. The intentions were logical. Canada needed workers. It needed taxpayers. It needed to compete globally in an aging, shrinking Western world. But here's what didn't grow fast enough. Housing, transit, primary health care, recognition of foreign credentials. For every 100,000 new people who arrived, fewer than 30,000 new homes were built. ER wait times spiked. Universities scrambled for classroom space. Cities ran out of shelter beds. And while many newcomers came to work, ready, willing, and qualified, they entered a system that wasn't ready for them. The problem wasn't immigration. It was planning. That's when the backlash started. In 2022, only 27% of Canadians felt there was too much immigration. By 2024, that number hit 58%. And it wasn't just online anger. Protests erupted in Toronto, Brampton, and parts of Alberta, not against immigrants themselves, but against the scale of the surge. Build first, grow later became a rallying cry. Because Canadians weren't rejecting immigration as a concept. They were rejecting a government that added people, but not places for them to live, study, and recover. This is where trust began to unravel. But here's the truth we can't ignore. Most immigrants didn't create this crisis. They walked into it. The cost of living squeeze, housing shortage, and overburdened infrastructure were already building for decades. But when the strain became too visible, immigrants became the scapegoat. They're taking the jobs. They're crowding the hospitals. They're driving up rent. These aren't facts. They're fears, shaped by a real sense of decline, and a leadership vacuum too slow to act. And so, a policy designed to build Canada's future is now threatening its social fabric. So where does that leave us? On one side, a Canada proud of its diversity, built by migration. On the other, a Canada stretched thin, uncertain, and afraid. The challenge now isn't to stop immigration, it's to fix the framework that supports it. Because if we don't, the promise of immigration, the one this country is built on, could quietly fall apart. Do you think Canada is growing too fast? Should we pause immigration or push for smarter planning? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. The next chapter might be the most important yet. The headlines say it's immigration. Too many, too fast. But what if the problem isn't the people, but the pipes they're being pushed through? Because when Canadians say the system feels broken, they're right. But if we zoom out, we'll see something surprising. The stress we're seeing now wasn't caused by immigration alone. It was caused by decades of underbuilding, underfunding, and political neglect, long before most of today's newcomers ever set foot in the country. Let's talk housing. The myth says immigrants are driving up rent. But the data says housing starts have been below national needs since at least 2004. And zoning laws in many cities still make it illegal to build anything but single-family homes on over 70% of residential land. Immigrants didn't pass those laws. They didn't block those apartments. That was Canada, doing what it's always done, protecting property, delaying density. The result? Not enough supply, bidding wars, landlords cashing in, renters drowning. Now let's look at healthcare. It's true. Emergency rooms are overcrowded. Family doctors are booked for months. Mental health care, still not fully covered. But again, the strain didn't start with immigration. In 1996, Canada had 2.5 doctors per 1,000 residents. Today, still barely over 2.7. That's 2 decades of population growth without provider growth. And when immigrants, many of them trained doctors and nurses, come here, they're locked out of practice by licensing barriers. In 2024, over 13,000 internationally trained health professionals in Canada remain unemployed or underemployed. That's not immigration stress. That's institutional failure. And what about jobs and wages? Some claim immigrants take away opportunities. But research shows immigration tends to increase long-term productivity and job creation. The real culprit behind wage stagnation? Automation, globalization, corporate profit hoarding, not immigration. In fact, over 60% of new permanent residents are economic class immigrants. They're selected for their ability to contribute, not compete unfairly. But the narrative persists. And when wages fall behind rent, someone always gets blamed. That's the danger, not the stress, but where we aim it. So let's be honest. Yes, Canada is under pressure. But not because immigration broke the system. The system was cracked long before. What immigrants did was reveal the cracks. Now the question is, do we fix the cracks? Or do we blame the people who walked into them? What do you think? Are we blaming the wrong people for a system that was already broken? Share your take in the comments. And if this gave you a new perspective, like, subscribe, and help push this video into more feeds. What if Canada's immigration plan isn't just about today, but about a century from now? That's the vision behind the Century Initiative, a private, non-partisan lobby group with a simple but ambitious goal. Grow Canada's population to 100 million by the year 2100. Supporters call it a blueprint for national prosperity. Critics call it reckless social engineering. But everyone agrees, if this plan succeeds, it will redefine Canada forever. The idea is rooted in economics. Canada is aging. Fewer births, more seniors. To sustain growth, more people are needed. To work, to pay taxes, to support public services. The Century Initiative says, if we plan properly, we can avoid the fate of demographic collapse like Japan or parts of Europe. Their projections say a bigger population will grow GDP, spark innovation, strengthen global influence. It's a case for long-term thinking in an age of short-term politics. But the backlash has been fierce, because this vision demands massive changes in immigration, infrastructure, and identity. And many Canadians ask, where will these people live? Who will build the homes, schools, and hospitals? And what happens to affordability, culture, cohesion? Critics argue the plan puts economic theory over social reality, that it assumes growth is good, without addressing the housing crisis, environmental strain, or healthcare bottlenecks already in motion. There's another reason the Century Initiative draws fire. Several of its founding members and advisors are linked to corporate finance, big real estate, and elite institutions. Former Prime Minister Dominic Barton, a key supporter, was also a global managing director at McKinsey, a firm known for pushing aggressive growth models around the world. For many critics, this raises a red flag. Is this plan about national prosperity or corporate expansion? And who really benefits when a country grows that fast? Still, the idea isn't going away. The federal government may not publicly endorse the 100 million plan, but immigration targets continue to rise. Policy is moving toward the Century Initiative, whether the public agrees or not. The question now isn't if Canada should grow, but how? How fast and for whom? Because a country of 100 million needs more than newcomers. It needs vision. It needs infrastructure. It needs trust. Do you believe in the Century Initiative? Is growing to 100 million people bold or blind? Tell us what you think in the comments. And if you're following this journey, subscribe and keep building the conversation with us. Imagine arriving in a new country with a degree in engineering and ending up stocking shelves at a grocery store, or being a licensed physician with years of experience and spending your first 5 years cleaning office buildings at night. This is not a rare story in Canada. It's the norm. Every year, tens of thousands of highly skilled immigrants arrive, invited by a point system that rewards education and experience. But once they get here, they're told their credentials aren't recognized, their training isn't valid, and the dream they were promised is delayed, sometimes permanently. This phenomenon has a name: credentialism. Canada is one of the only countries in the world that recruits skilled labor by design, and then blocks those workers with complex, outdated professional licensing systems. Doctors, nurses, teachers, engineers, tradespeople all face provincial regulatory barriers, expensive assessments, and long retraining delays. Many give up. Others spend years retraining for jobs they were already doing. Meanwhile, hospitals need staff, schools need teachers, construction needs workers. And we wonder why the system feels broken. Because it is. Let's break this down. Canada's immigration system, the express entry system, gives the most points to people with graduate degrees, work experience, fluency in English or French. These are highly educated professionals. But once selected, they face provincial regulatory boards that demand Canadian-specific training, local work experience, expensive exams, all of which take time, money, and luck. While bills pile up, it's not just frustrating, it's economic waste. And Canada loses billions in productivity every year as a result. But there's also an emotional cost. Imagine spending years of your life building a career, only to start over. Imagine your child seeing you as a janitor when you were a professor. Confidence erodes, depression rises, families fracture under financial stress, and eventually, people leave. Canada calls itself a magnet for talent. But in reality, it's losing the very people it fought to attract. Some provinces are starting to change. Ontario launched fast-track licensing for nurses. Before Christ now streamlines pathways for some skilled trades. But for most professions, red tape still rules. If Canada is serious about immigration, not just as numbers but as people, it needs to match its policies with action. Immigration without integration is a broken promise. And if we want to keep the best and brightest, we must stop forcing them to start from zero. Are you or someone you know stuck in credential limbo? What do you think Canada should change to respect immigrant talent? Comment below. Share your story. Subscribe if you believe skills should be valued, no matter where they're from. For decades, Canada was different. While immigration tore apart political coalitions in Europe and the US, in Canada, it remained a unifying issue. Liberals, conservatives, both parties welcomed newcomers. Public support remained high. The narrative was clear. Immigration makes Canada stronger. But in recent years, something has shifted. And in this year, immigration is no longer a consensus. It's a wedge issue, a point of polarization, a political fault line. The backlash isn't coming from one place. Some of it is economic. People struggling with rent, groceries, and jobs. Some of it is cultural, fears of change, discomfort with difference. But much of it is emotional. Canadians feel their standard of living is falling. And when systems collapse, people look for simple explanations. That's when populism thrives. Politicians start promising easy fixes. cut immigration, close the borders, put Canadians first. But these promises rarely come with facts, just anger, aimed in the wrong direction. We saw this play out in 2024's provincial elections. In multiple ridings, candidates ran on anti-immigration platforms and won. Fringe parties gained ground by exploiting fear. Even mainstream leaders began quietly shifting their tone, announcing immigration pauses, promising to cap international students, blaming housing shortages on newcomers, not because the data supported it, but because the polls did. But this moment is bigger than one election, because the risk isn't just policy drift. The risk is that immigration, once Canada's proudest policy, becomes a political weapon, one used to divide, distract, deflect. And when that happens, we stop asking the real questions. How do we build enough housing for all? How do we train more doctors? How do we welcome immigrants without leaving Canadians behind? The answers aren't simple, but they exist if we choose complexity over blame. Have you seen immigration becoming more political in your community? Do you think politicians are helping or dividing? Tell us in the comments. And if this documentary is helping you see deeper, subscribe and help keep the conversation grounded in facts, not fear. It starts with a dream. A young student in India, Nigeria, or the Philippines watches a YouTube ad. Study in Canada. World-class education. Pathway to permanent residence. Parents empty savings. Students take loans. Agencies collect fees. And then they arrive, only to find overcrowded housing, sky-high rent, and jobs that pay just enough to starve slowly. Welcome to Canada's fastest-growing export, education as an immigration product. In just 5 years, Canada more than doubled its international student intake. Private colleges exploded, some operating out of strip malls and office parks. And many of these students weren't just coming for a diploma, they were coming for immigration, because Canada told them, study here, work part-time, graduate, get PR. But no one told them the truth. Permanent residence is not guaranteed. Work permits are capped. Housing is unaffordable. Support is minimal. It's a pipeline. But for many, it ends in a dead end. Some work multiple jobs, violating permit limits just to survive. Others live 12 to a room or sleep in shifts. Many can't access mental health care and feel ashamed to call home. In 2023, a student in British Columbia died by suicide after being evicted. She had no support. Her family found out through WhatsApp. This isn't education, it's exploitation, hidden behind diplomas. So who profits? Colleges, landlords, immigration agencies, all make money. The government gets billions in tuition, but the students? They get no housing guarantee, no PR assurance, and increasingly, no future in the country they were told to invest in. This is the dark side of Canada's international education boom, a system that invites, extracts, and abandons. The backlash has begun. In 2024, public anger over student numbers sparked calls for a cap. Provinces began tightening permits. Ottawa froze visa approvals for certain institutions. But the damage was already done, because the students came in good faith, believing what Canada said. Now, they're caught in a system that doesn't protect them, or the country they hoped to call home. Do you know an international student in Canada? What do you think of the system? Comment with your thoughts. Like and share this story, because too many students suffer in silence. Immigration isn't just movement, it's transformation. It doesn't just bring people to a country, it changes the country and the people who arrive. Over the past 30 years, immigration has reshaped what it means to be Canadian. We've become more diverse, more multilingual, more global in how we eat, speak, vote, work, and worship. In cities like Toronto and Vancouver, there is no majority ethnicity. In schools, mosques and temples share neighborhoods with cathedrals. It's not always easy, but it's real. This is what immigration does. It turns countries into conversations. But conversation requires listening. And lately, many Canadians, both immigrants and native-born, feel unheard. Immigrants feel misled, promised jobs that don't exist, blocked by credentials, blamed for problems they didn't create. Meanwhile, native-born Canadians feel left behind, priced out of homes, waiting in ERs, wondering if they still belong in the country they were born in. What's emerging is a subtle, dangerous tension, not just between people, but between stories. And then there's identity. What does it mean to be Canadian today? For some, it still means maple syrup, hockey, politeness. For others, it's Ramadan lights in a Toronto condo, or African grocery stores beside Tim Hortons. But underneath it all, there's a question. Are we building a country where everyone feels they belong? Or are we just layering cultures without connection? Immigration also changes immigrants. People come with dreams, but leave parts of themselves behind. Accents are softened. Names are shortened. Faith is quieted in workplaces. And slowly, many immigrants become experts in adaptation, but strangers to themselves. The cost of acceptance is sometimes invisibility. And yet, people are trying. Across Canada, neighbors are organizing block parties. Employers are offering cultural holidays. Youth are blending identities with ease. Canadian, Punjabi, Haitian, Somali, Quebecois, all at once. The truth is, Canada isn't being broken by immigration. It's being remade. The question is whether we will remake it together, or let fear, silence, and cynicism tear that chance apart. Has immigration changed your sense of identity? What does being Canadian mean to you now compared to 10 years ago? Drop a comment below. Like and subscribe, because these are the conversations Canada needs. Immigration built Canada, but immigration alone won't save it. Not without planning, not without compassion, not without the political courage to fix what's broken and preserve what works. Right now, we're at a crossroads. We can treat immigration as a pressure point, or we can treat it as a shared responsibility, one that requires investment, trust, and vision. Because this isn't just about newcomers, it's about all of us. And what kind of country we want to live in, 20, 50, 100 years from now. But this isn't just policy, it's personal. It's the single mom who came here for her son's future and found herself in a basement with no heating. It's the young man who can't explain to his parents why his Canadian degree didn't lead to PR. It's the farmer in Saskatchewan who needs workers, but sees his neighbors blaming them for housing prices in cities. It's all of us, stuck in a cycle of growth without preparation. And if we keep looking away, that cycle will collapse. But there is hope, because Canada still has something few countries do: the will to improve. Our history shows it, from the point system to refugee protection to global leadership and resettlement. The challenge now is not about shutting doors. It's about opening them, with structure, with strategy, and with soul. We can be a country that grows, without leaving anyone behind. But first, we have to choose it. What kind of immigration system do you want to see in Canada's future? What's working, and what needs to change? Join the conversation below. For decades, the middle class was Canada's pride. A promise that if you worked hard, followed the rules, bought a home, saved a little, you'd be okay. That promise is fading. Today, millions of Canadians do everything right and still fall behind. Home ownership is out of reach. Debt is climbing. Wages haven't kept pace with inflation in 20 years. And the middle class that once anchored Canadian life is slipping into a myth. This chapter explores how it happened and what it means for the future of the country. For years, we've heard the same story. The economy is growing. Unemployment is low. Wages are rising. But for millions of Canadians, that story doesn't feel true. They're earning more than they did 10 years ago, but they're getting less for it. Because while the numbers go up, so does everything else. Groceries, housing, transit, tuition, insurance, childcare. Incomes may have risen on paper, but in real life, they've fallen behind. Let's talk numbers. Since the early 2000s, median wages in Canada have risen around 2% per year. But the cost of essential goods and services has grown 3 to 6% annually, sometimes more. Rent in major cities has doubled or tripled. Grocery bills are up over 20% since 2020. And a single dental appointment can wipe out a week's pay. Even families earning over $80,000 a year, once the sweet spot of the middle class, now say they feel like they're just surviving. Because income growth is an illusion. When purchasing power is shrinking, and the gap between income and cost isn't new. It started widening in the late 1990s, when wages stagnated, but the economy didn't. Corporations posted record profits. Homeowners watched values skyrocket. But the average Canadian wage earner? They started losing ground. Paychecks covered less. Debt filled the gap, and over time, we stopped noticing. It became normal to need credit cards for groceries. Normal to put off dental care. Normal to work 2 jobs and still be broke. This isn't just inflation, it's structural decline. And then came the pandemic. Prices surged. Stimulus money faded, interest rates rose. But wages didn't keep up. And suddenly, even those who had always felt secure found themselves looking at their pay stubs and asking, why doesn't this go as far as it used to? Because it doesn't. A $60,000 salary in 2010 meant stability. In 2024, it means compromise. People earning middle incomes are now budgeting like the working poor. And those who fall behind stay behind, because the climb out is steeper every year. It's not just that things cost more, it's that expectations haven't changed. The old promise, work hard, buy a house, raise a family, retire comfortably, still lives in the national imagination. But for today's earners, it feels out of reach. They're told to save, to invest, to cut back. But what's left to cut when the rent is 50% of your income? When a single emergency shatters the budget? What we're seeing isn't just inflation. It's the slow erosion of economic dignity. The middle class was never just about how much you made. It was about what that income allowed you to do. And for a growing number of Canadians, income no longer offers opportunity. It only offers survival. The income illusion tells them they're doing okay, while their lived experience says otherwise. It's a quiet kind of gaslighting, and it's why frustration is growing. Because people aren't lazy. They're tired of working harder for less. In Canada today, there are 2 kinds of people: those who own property and those who don't. That one detail, whether you own or rent, says more about your financial future than almost anything else. Because in today's economy, assets, not income, are what builds security. And the gap between homeowners and renters has become a class divide. Owning property used to be a milestone. Today, it's a luxury. In cities like Vancouver and Toronto, home prices have gone up over 300% in the last 20 years. But wages? Barely 50%. That means families who bought homes in the 1990s or early 2000s have seen their net worth grow by hundreds of thousands of dollars, just by staying put. Meanwhile, renters pay more and more each year, with nothing to show for it. One builds equity, the other builds instability. And the longer you rent, the harder it is to ever catch up. This isn't just about ownership, it's about access to opportunity. Homeowners can leverage their equity to start a business, pay for education, weather a financial emergency. Renters, by contrast, spend a growing share of income on housing, often over 50%. They're more likely to live paycheck to paycheck, more likely to move frequently, less likely to retire comfortably, and their kids are less likely to inherit anything. That's not just a housing issue, it's generational inequality in motion. The asset trap is made worse by how Canada taxes wealth. Capital gains on a principal residence? Tax-free. Rental income? Taxed at a lower rate than salary. Property owners benefit from government programs, mortgage deferrals, and rising values. Renters? They get rent hikes, bidding wars, and a notice to vacate. And so the cycle repeats. The rich get richer through passive appreciation. Everyone else pays them rent. And here's the catch. Even many homeowners now feel trapped. They're house rich, cash poor, unable to move, unable to downsize, locked into high mortgage payments as rates climb. And if they lose their job or face illness, they risk losing everything. Owning a home has gone from being a dream to a financial burden with no exit. Because in today's market, mobility is punished. If you sell, you can't afford to buy again. If you rent, you may never re-enter the market. The ladder is broken, both at the bottom and the top. What we've built isn't just a housing crisis. It's a system that rewards wealth and penalizes effort. A system where two people earning the same income will live entirely different lives based on whether they bought property 10 years ago. And when wealth becomes about timing, not merit, that's not a free market. That's a trap. Once upon a time in Canada, the dream was simple. If you worked hard, got an education, stayed out of trouble, you'd do better than your parents. That was the ladder, a belief in upward mobility. Today, that ladder is cracking. And for many, it's gone altogether. Social mobility, the ability to climb from one class to another, is foundational to the middle-class story. But the data now shows it's slowing down. In Canada, a child born into a low-income family in the 1980s had a decent shot at entering the middle class by their 30s. A child born in 2000? Their odds are lower, even with more education. Because today, class is sticky. If you start poor, you're more likely to stay there. And if you're born rich, odds are you'll remain protected. Not because you worked harder, but because mobility costs more than it used to. Take education. It was once a rocket to the middle class. Now, it's an expensive ticket that may or may not get you there. Tuition has more than doubled since the 1990s. Student debt has ballooned. And even after graduation, young workers face precarious jobs, contract work, and unpaid internships. Degrees are no longer guarantees. They're minimum requirements for uncertain futures. The ladder hasn't disappeared completely, but every rung has gotten thinner. Add to that, the growing role of family wealth. Today, inheritance plays a bigger role in financial security than any generation since the 1930s. That means if your parents own property, you might too. But if they don't, if they rent, or arrived in Canada with little, you'll likely start behind, and the system will rarely help you catch up. Wealth, not work, increasingly determines who advances. And that changes everything. When mobility stalls, something deeper happens. People stop believing in effort. They stop investing in the future. They stop trusting the system. And that distrust doesn't just hurt the economy, it hurts democracy. Because when the ladder disappears, people don't climb. They fight. And that fight, between generations, between classes, between newcomers and locals, is already happening. Quietly, daily, everywhere. If Canada wants to restore the middle class, it has to rebuild the ladder. Make education affordable. Make housing accessible. Make hard work mean something again. Because without mobility, the middle class isn't just shrinking, it's becoming an inheritance, not an achievement. For decades, the answer to rising costs was simple: get a second income. As prices rose and wages stagnated, more families adapted, sending both parents into the workforce. And for a while, it worked. 2 paychecks meant a shot at home ownership, university savings, summer camps, and maybe a vacation. But that formula is breaking down, because in today's economy, even 2 full-time incomes aren't enough. Across Canada, families with 2 earners are falling behind. They make more than ever before, but also pay more than ever before for everything essential: rent, groceries, childcare, commuting, healthcare. And when one child gets sick, or daycare closes, or a layoff hits, there's no cushion. That second income? It's not building wealth. It's patching the hole that used to be covered by one. Consider the cost of childcare. In cities like Toronto and Vancouver, infant care can cost $1,500 to $2,000 a month, nearly the equivalent of a full-time wage. That means one parent's job barely covers the cost of being able to work. And yet, most families don't have a choice. Because even with two salaries, one is never enough. And so the pressure builds. Longer hours, less rest, more stress. This isn't prosperity, it's managed survival. And what about time? Dual-income households are working more hours than ever. But with kids, commutes, chores, and side gigs, there's no margin left. Parents are exhausted. Relationships are strained. Mental health is fraying. The second income was supposed to create freedom. Instead, it's made life more crowded, more complex, and often more fragile. Because we haven't just lost affordability, we've lost time. The one thing you can't earn back. The two-income trap doesn't just affect families. It shapes how people vote, how they raise kids, how they feel about the future. When working full-time, twice, still isn't enough to save, invest, or rest, hope erodes. And people start asking hard questions. What's the point? Why work so hard if we're still treading water? It wasn't supposed to be like this. Two incomes used to be a bonus. Now, it's a requirement just to stay afloat. And even that isn't always enough. Until that changes, we're not just looking at a cost of living crisis. We're looking at a quality of life collapse. For the very people who were supposed to be the backbone of this country. Every April, millions of Canadians sit down to file their taxes. Some owe. Some expect refunds. But almost everyone walks away with the same feeling. We're paying more and getting less. That frustration isn't just emotional, it's structural. Because in Canada's current tax system, the middle class carries the heaviest burden. While wealth, privilege, and corporate profit often slip through untouched. Let's start with income. If you earn a salary, whether you're a teacher, a nurse, or a contractor, your taxes are automatic, predictable. You pay every paycheck. But if you earn through capital gains, dividends, or inheritance, the system gets fuzzier. Those forms of income are taxed at lower rates than wages. You can defer. You can split income. You can claim deductions. The more money you make from money, the more ways you have to keep it. And corporations? Many of Canada's largest companies pay tax rates lower than small businesses or working families. Some report billions in profits and pay a fraction of what a dual-income household does in taxes. Legal loopholes, offshore accounts, trust structures. These aren't bugs in the system. They're features, written into law, defended by lobbyists, and normalized by policy. Meanwhile, the average middle-class taxpayer files honestly and wonders why roads are crumbling, hospitals are overwhelmed, and rent keeps rising. Add to that consumption taxes, sales tax, gas tax, telecom fees, carbon pricing. These hit everyone, regardless of income. But they hurt low and middle-income households the most. Because when you spend nearly everything you earn, you pay more of your total income in tax. While the wealthy can afford to save, invest, and delay. This creates a simple but devastating equation. The people who earn their income through work are taxed more heavily than those who generate wealth through ownership. And when that imbalance grows, trust erodes. People start to believe the system is rigged, that they're suckers for playing by the rules. And resentment toward government, toward newcomers, toward the wealthy, begins to grow. Canada needs taxes. They fund hospitals, schools, pensions, and transit. But when working people are taxed more aggressively than billionaires, it's not just unfair, it's unsustainable. Because tired people don't just burn out, they push back. And if the middle class continues to carry the weight of a system that protects the top, the weight may become too much to bear. At first, it sounded like freedom. Flexible hours. Be your own boss. Work when you want. How you want. The gig economy was supposed to empower workers, but a decade later, the reality is clear. Flexibility has become instability, and millions of Canadians now find themselves in a labor market that offers no security, no benefits, and no future. The numbers tell the story. 1 in 3 Canadian workers is now considered non-traditional, part-time, freelance, or contract-based. Among young workers and immigrants, the percentage is even higher. And while some choose this path, Most are simply locked out of permanent jobs. Tech, healthcare, retail, delivery, education, sectors that once provided careers are now filled with temporary placements and short-term gigs. No sick days, no pension, no employer-paid benefits. Just task after task, paycheck to paycheck, with no ladder to climb. Platforms like Uber, Skip the Dishes, and Amazon Flex were once seen as a side hustle revolution. Today, they're full-time jobs for thousands, many working 60-plus hours a week with no job title, no legal protections, and no clear income floor. This isn't entrepreneurship, it's piecework, digitally rebranded. You're your own boss. Until the app changes the rules. Until the algorithm decides you're too slow. Until your car breaks down and you can't afford repairs. Then you're not a business owner. You're just alone. But it's not just the platform economy. The gig mindset has infected every part of the labor market. Teachers on rolling contracts. Health workers hired through agencies. IT specialists jumping project to project, year to year. This shift benefits one side, employers. They avoid paying benefits, avoid long-term commitments, avoid union pressure, and the cost is pushed onto workers through stress, instability, and declining living standards. For years, society was built on the promise of steady work equals stable life. But that link has broken. Today, even full-time workers can't qualify for a mortgage. Even skilled professionals can't rely on employment past a 12-month term. And young Canadians? They're not job hopping. They're surviving in a system that offers no anchors. The gig economy was sold as a future of freedom. But for most, it's become a future of fragility. Until governments update labor laws, extend protections to contract and app-based workers, and hold corporations accountable, Canada's middle class will continue to erode. Because a country built on work cannot thrive if the work no longer works. In Canada, inequality isn't just about income or education, it's about location. Because more than ever, your postal code determines your life path. Where you're born, or where you can afford to live, shapes your access to jobs, housing, transit, healthcare, and even hope. In today's Canada, class is mapped. Consider housing. In Toronto, a downtown condo now sells for over $800,000. A semi-detached home in Vancouver costs more than $1.5 million. But just 30 minutes away, in Hamilton, Abbotsford, or Laval, homes are smaller, older, and still climbing in price. For lower-income families, this means being pushed farther out, away from job centers, schools, and public transit. And for many immigrants or racialized communities, these edges become permanent. They're not just living in different neighborhoods. They're living in different Canadas. It's not just housing. Healthcare access, school quality, walkability, grocery pricing. These vary dramatically by region. Rural communities often face long drives to the nearest ER. Northern towns deal with supply chain markups on basic goods. Meanwhile, downtown cores may offer more jobs. But fewer people can afford to live close enough to benefit. The middle class once spanned suburbs, cities, and small towns. Today, the distance between them has become a gap in opportunity. Commuting is another invisible divider. The farther you live from where jobs are, the more you lose. In time, in money, in energy. Some Canadians now spend up to 3 hours a day just getting to work and back. That's 15 hours a week. Unpaid, uncounted, and exhausting. It's also time not spent parenting, resting, learning, or building community. In this way, long commutes become a form of economic penalty, a toll on those who can't afford to live close to where wealth is generated. Add to that, regional inequality. The resource-rich provinces versus manufacturing hubs. The urban core versus the rural periphery. The English-speaking majority versus underserved Francophone or Indigenous communities. Each region tells a different story of who thrives and who doesn't, but in many places the message is the same. Opportunity doesn't knock evenly. Class isn't just a number on a paycheck. It's a question of where you wake up, which services surround you, what jobs are within reach, what kind of air your children breathe. And in Canada today, the answers vary. Neighborhood by neighborhood, province by province, street by street. Until we address this geography of inequality, the middle class won't just shrink, it will fracture across invisible borders that grow more visible every day. We talk a lot about money, wages, rent, groceries, mortgages. But there's a cost we rarely name, and it may be the one Canadians feel most deeply: emotional exhaustion. Because being middle class in Canada today doesn't mean stability. It means holding on, tightly, desperately, and wondering every week, is this the month it falls apart? Burnout isn't just for overworked professionals anymore. It's become a shared condition, from retail workers to civil servants to tech developers. Parents juggling 2 jobs and school drop-offs. Nurses working double shifts while raising families. Students clocking 40 hours a week just to afford tuition. Across all sectors, all provinces, one theme emerges. People are exhausted, not from ambition, but from survival. There's no room to breathe. Rent is due, groceries are up, the car needs fixing, the kid needs a dentist. And even with 2 incomes, families are one crisis away from the edge. The mental load is constant. The calendar never ends. And the gap between effort and reward grows more disorienting by the year. The result? A kind of slow panic, buried under politeness. Canadians are struggling, quietly. Middle-class burnout looks like canceling plans you can't afford, smiling while skipping meals, Googling free therapy and finding wait lists, telling your kids, "We'll see," when you already know the answer is no. It looks like resilience. But underneath, it's fragility. A country of tired people trying to pretend things are okay. And this exhaustion doesn't stay personal. It affects productivity, relationships, parenting, civic trust. It erodes the energy people once gave to their communities, their creativity, their ambitions. And in a country built on the promise that if you work hard, you'll be rewarded. That kind of emotional erosion is a warning sign. A system that constantly drains its middle class will eventually lose more than tax dollars. It will lose hope. The middle class isn't just an income bracket. It's a state of mind, a belief that effort pays off, that life can get better, that you're building something. But when you're always tired, always behind, always afraid of falling, that belief begins to die. And what replaces it isn't laziness, it's numbness. And no democracy can survive a middle class that has stopped believing. For years, the middle class was the symbol of Canadian progress. A steady job, a modest home, free public health care, not wealth, not luxury, just dignity, and the belief that life was moving in the right direction. Today, that belief is at risk. But the middle class isn't dead. It's asking for help. The question is, are we willing to fight for it? To save the middle class, we first have to redefine it, not just as a group of earners, but as a vision of fairness, a society where effort meets opportunity, where workers can afford homes, where children can attend school without crushing debt, and where retirement doesn't feel like free fall. We need to stop asking, how do we protect the middle class? And start asking, how do we rebuild it? That means bold policy. Real investments in affordable housing, not just incentives. Universal childcare and pharmacare. Fair taxation of wealth and corporations. Public investment in green jobs and modern infrastructure. Protection for gig and contract workers. And most of all, leadership that stops pretending the problem is solved and starts treating it like the emergency it is. But saving the middle class isn't just a government task. It's cultural. It means ending the shaming of people who struggle. It means recognizing that success isn't always visible, and struggle isn't always personal. It means talking to each other again, listening, finding common ground between renters and owners, urban and rural, new Canadians and old. Because the forces that divide us all benefit from our silence. The future of the middle class won't look like the past, but it can be rebuilt. Fairer, greener, more inclusive. A middle class that isn't inherited, but created through collective investment. One where effort leads to progress, not burnout. And where getting ahead doesn't mean leaving others behind. The story of Canada is the story of the middle class. We lose that story. We lose what holds us together. But if we listen, rebuild, and imagine differently, we might just write a new chapter. Not one of survival, but of shared progress. It starts quietly. A longer wait at the emergency room. A delay in school supports. A broken escalator at the metro station that takes weeks to fix. One by one, these moments seem small, but together they form a pattern. Canada's systems are cracking, not because people aren't working hard, but because the structures we rely on were never built for the pressure they now face. In healthcare, the symptoms are everywhere. Family doctors are vanishing. ER wait times are the longest in modern history. Nurses and paramedics are burning out, walking away, or begging for change. Even basic care, like dental, mental health, or prescriptions, remains inaccessible to millions. It's not about funding alone. It's about designing a system for crisis management that forgot how to manage health. Schools were once the heart of community life. Now they're overcrowded, underfunded, and absorbing roles left behind by every other system: social work, mental health, nutrition, even immigration settlement. Teachers face impossible workloads. Students face rising needs. And administrators face year after year of budget battles. The classroom is no longer a sanctuary. It's a pressure cooker. Infrastructure is falling behind too. Public transit can't keep up with growing suburbs. Water systems in Indigenous communities remain unsafe. Affordable housing developments are stuck in red tape. And decades of deferred maintenance have left bridges, roads, and buildings near collapse. Canada's growth strategy is aggressive, but its infrastructure strategy? Still reactive, still slow, still built for yesterday. Then there's bureaucracy. The rules, the forms, the approvals, they're supposed to ensure fairness, but too often, they ensure nothing happens. Projects stall. Funds go unspent. Workers burn out from paperwork while people wait months, even years, for help. The system isn't broken because of bad intent. It's broken because of systemic inertia, an inability to move at the speed of need. As the world digitizes, Canada is falling behind. Digital government services are slow, siloed, and sometimes years out of date. In rural communities, internet access remains unreliable. In immigrant and senior communities, digital literacy barriers block access to everything from healthcare to housing applications. A modern country can't function on paper forms and PDF downloads, especially not in the age of AI. The rural-urban divide has also grown sharper. In cities, services are overwhelmed. In rural areas, they're just missing. A woman in Toronto waits 8 hours in the ER. A man in Northern Ontario drives 3 hours just to find one. It's not just a population gap, it's an equity gap, and one that defines how Canadians experience public service. No one seems responsible. Ask federal officials, they'll blame provinces. Ask provinces, they'll blame municipalities. And in the end, people blame the system, or worse, each other. What's missing is accountability, the political courage to say, we failed to plan, and we'll fix it. Without ownership, dysfunction spreads. As systems crumble, the private sector steps in, quietly. More Canadians now pay out of pocket for private diagnostic clinics, tutoring, mental health care, and even ER wait fast passes. What was once universal is becoming tiered. Those with money move to the front of the line. Everyone else waits. This isn't innovation, it's quiet privatization, and it risks turning public service into a luxury. But it doesn't have to be this way. Resilience can be rebuilt. With long-term investments, cross-government coordination, modern systems designed around people, not paperwork, and a renewed vision of what the public good means in the 21st century. Because if we want a country that works, not just on paper but in practice, we must stop patching broken systems and start building new ones. Inclusion is a word Canada loves. It's in government speeches, corporate slogans, and every brochure for international students. But saying everyone belongs doesn't make it true. Because when you look closely at who gets hired, who gets promoted, who gets recognized, and who gets paid, a different picture emerges. A picture of quiet exclusion, of systems that appear open, but quietly favor the familiar, and a country that invites diversity, without always making room for it. Start with the job market. Canada boasts one of the most educated immigrant populations in the world. Yet racialized Canadians, particularly newcomers, are overrepresented in low-wage, precarious jobs. Many are overqualified and underpaid. Foreign-trained doctors drive for Uber. Engineers work in call centers. Degrees are dismissed, experience ignored, accents questioned. And for Black, Indigenous, and other marginalized groups born here, the problem isn't credentials, it's recognition. Their work is overlooked, their potential doubted, their advancement stalled. Inclusion by presence, not by power. Then look at pay. On average, racialized workers in Canada earn less than white workers, even with similar education and experience. Gender adds another layer. Immigrant women face the steepest wage gaps of all. And for those who live at the intersection of race, gender, and disability, the barriers multiply, silently. Because Canadian workplaces talk about inclusion, but often avoid confronting the structures that exclude, the hiring pipelines that favor insiders, the performance reviews built on cultural bias, the leadership teams that rarely reflect the communities they serve. If opportunity is real, it should be visible. But visibility alone doesn't equal inclusion. Representation in media, in politics, in universities, it matters. But too often, it's cosmetic. A face in the brochure, a single voice at the table. True inclusion means more than presence. It means influence. Who sets the agenda? Who makes the decisions? And who gets to belong without having to perform gratitude every step of the way? For many, inclusion comes with a quiet cost. Code switching to fit in. Avoiding traditional foods in the break room. Laughing at jokes that sting. These aren't policies. They're survival strategies. And over time, they wear people down. Inclusion shouldn't require assimilation. It shouldn't mean shrinking yourself to make others comfortable. It should mean being valued for who you are, not who you resemble. Indigenous peoples face a unique and urgent exclusion. Their communities are often economically isolated, by design. Resource wealth is extracted from their lands, while poverty remains entrenched. Infrastructure is neglected. Health outcomes are poorer. And yet, they're told to integrate into systems that never respected their sovereignty. Real inclusion means more than consultation. It means honoring land, culture, and leadership, not absorbing them into a colonial framework. Accessibility is another test. Inclusion means everyone, not just the able-bodied. But many workplaces, transit systems, schools, and websites still create silent walls for people with disabilities. They may comply with policy, but they rarely design with dignity. True accessibility isn't a checklist, it's a mindset. How do we build a society where no one is left behind simply because they move, learn, or see differently? And then there's language. Canada is officially bilingual, but in reality, opportunity is often unilingual. Many newcomers fluent in French or English still face discrimination based on accent, name, or cultural background. Meanwhile, those who speak neither official language are often excluded from services altogether. Inclusion requires language justice. That means translation, interpretation, and a deep respect for the mother tongues that shape who we are. In a country as wealthy as Canada, debt shouldn't be a way of life. And yet, for millions, it is. Canadians are some of the most indebted people in the world, not because they live lavishly, but because debt has become the only way to survive. Rent, tuition, groceries, emergencies. If income doesn't stretch, credit fills the gap. But credit comes at a cost, and slowly, that cost is consuming the middle class. Household debt in Canada has now surpassed 180% of disposable income. That means for every dollar a household earns, it owes nearly $2. Most of that isn't luxury spending. It's mortgages, car payments, credit cards, and student loans. Canadians borrow because they can't afford not to. Housing is unaffordable, wages are flat, emergency savings are rare, and for younger Canadians, especially those without family wealth, debt is the starting point, not the fallback. The mortgage crisis reveals the deeper spiral. As interest rates climb, monthly payments stretch past comfort. Homeowners on variable rate mortgages now spend thousands more than they budgeted. Many can't afford to sell because they'd never be able to buy again. Others rely on home equity lines of credit to cover everyday costs. What used to be a wealth-building asset has become a financial trap, one that ties people to a house and a lifestyle they can barely afford to maintain. Renters don't fare better. With no equity and no relief, renters often borrow just to keep up. Credit cards, payday loans, buy now, pay later apps. All of them offer quick fixes, and all of them profit from desperation. Because for every $500 surprise, a car repair, a dentist visit, a rent increase, there's a financial product designed to capitalize on the gap. And the interest keeps ticking. Student debt is a particularly brutal entry point. In provinces without subsidized tuition, students graduate with tens of thousands in loans. And the jobs they enter, retail, hospitality, contract work, often don't pay enough to service the debt. So they defer, extend, refinance. And before long, that original loan has doubled, or more. What was supposed to be an investment feels more like a punishment. Even the federal government has leaned into debt as strategy. During the pandemic, emergency aid saved lives. But now, deficit levels are high, and pressure is mounting to cut spending. Yet the public still needs support for housing, for healthcare, for climate transition, and if the government retreats from investment, the private debt burden only grows. Canada risks becoming a country where public services shrink, and personal debt becomes the only safety net. But the cost of debt isn't just financial, it's emotional. Anxiety, shame, sleepless nights, relationships strained, families delayed, dreams paused indefinitely. People stop investing in themselves, stop planning, stop believing things can improve. And that resignation becomes a public health issue. Because chronic debt isn't just a private stressor, it's a societal drag. Who profits from all this? Financial institutions, payday lenders, real estate speculators. There's an entire economy built around Canadian insecurity. And that economy is growing because the system depends on it. It's more profitable for banks to collect interest than to help people save. More efficient for governments to offer deferrals than to raise wages. More convenient for landlords to raise rent than for cities to build. Debt has become the solution to every problem. And that's the problem. Breaking the debt cycle will require a different approach. Living wages that match reality. Affordable education, rent control and housing supply, caps on predatory lending. A culture that values stability over speculation. Personal responsibility matters, but systemic design matters more. And right now, Canadians are drowning in a system built to float the banks, not the people. Canada's debt crisis isn't a story of reckless spending. It's a story of quiet survival, of millions doing everything right and still falling short. We need a new story, one where financial dignity is not a privilege but a baseline, where prosperity is measured not by how much you owe, but by how freely you can live. Because a future built on credit isn't a future at all. Canada has always been open to the world, open to trade, open to talent, open to capital. But what happens when being open becomes being exposed? When the economy is no longer shaped by public priorities, but by the preferences of foreign investors? This chapter explores the uncomfortable truth: Canada is for sale, and the price is being paid by everyday people. Walk through any major city and it's clear, the skyline belongs to investors. From Toronto's glass condos to Vancouver's luxury developments, much of the new real estate isn't built for locals. It's built for portfolios, foreign buyers, domestic speculators, Global capital funds, they don't need to live here, they just need returns. And the result? Homes become commodities. Not shelter, but assets. And Canadians are left to fight for scraps in their own housing market. The numbers tell the story. In cities like Toronto and Vancouver, the average home price is now over $1 million. And in some markets, foreign and institutional buyers account for up to 10 to 15% of activity. Enough to distort pricing, fuel bidding wars, and push working-class families out. Even when vacant home taxes are introduced, the market adapts. Corporations restructure their holdings. Developers keep building units no one can afford. And the dream of ownership drifts further away. But it's not just housing. Farmland, factories, and even critical infrastructure are now subject to global buyouts. Canadian water bottling rights sold to multinational corporations. Telecom companies snapped up by foreign interests. Data centers controlled by global tech giants. Bit by bit, the country's economic backbone is being outsourced. And with each sale, local control weakens. Decisions are made in boardrooms thousands of miles away, with little regard for Canadian workers, communities, or the environment. Supporters argue that foreign capital fuels growth, that it brings jobs, builds infrastructure, and increases GDP. But what kind of growth matters? GDP goes up, but so do evictions, so does inequality, so does resentment. Because when profits are extracted and not reinvested, the country grows on paper while shrinking in reality. The influence of global capital also shapes policy. Real estate lobbies resist rent control. Investment funds push governments to protect their returns. And elected officials, desperate for economic activity, often ignore the long-term risks. Short-term foreign money becomes a substitute for sustainable planning. And before long, public priorities become market preferences. Affordable housing becomes luxury towers. Local businesses become franchises. The city remains, but the soul starts to fade. Some Canadians are starting to push back, demanding foreign buyer taxes, calling for limits on land sales, protesting the takeover of local industry. But every pushback is met with legal challenges, lobbying, or loopholes. Because once capital is inside the system, it doesn't leave quietly. It embeds itself, not just in property, but in politics. And the longer this continues, the harder it will be to reverse. This isn't about nationalism. It's about sovereignty, about deciding as a country who gets to shape the future and who profits from it. No country can survive if it sells off its essentials: housing, land, water, data. Canada is rich not just in resources, but in the right to determine how those resources are used. That right is slipping away. The answer isn't isolation, but regulation. A clear, courageous approach that welcomes investment, without surrendering control. One that puts the public good above private gain, and remembers that growth means nothing if the people who live here can no longer afford to stay. Canada's economy was built with the help of the world, but its future must be built for the people who call it home. The question isn't whether we sell, it's what we're willing to lose in the deal. The truth is, inclusion doesn't happen by accident. It must be built. Through policies that measure equity, not just diversity. Through leadership that reflects the population. Through education that acknowledges history, including Canada's own legacy of exclusion. We can't fix what we won't name. And right now, too much of what's broken stays quiet. Canada's future depends on its diversity, but that future will only work if everyone has a place in it. Not just a seat at the table, but a voice in shaping the room. Real inclusion isn't about ticking boxes, it's about removing barriers. So that no matter where you were born, how you speak, or what you carry, you are seen, you are heard, and you belong. Not by permission, but by right. At first, it felt like progress. The internet brought us closer. Social media gave everyone a voice. Smartphones put the world in our pockets. Canada became more connected than ever, from coast to coast to coast. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. More connection brought less unity. Because the digital revolution didn't just transform how we talk. It transformed who gets heard, who gets left out, and how truth itself is understood. Today, Canada is facing a paradox. We are digitally saturated, but socially fragmented. Almost every Canadian has a device. Internet use is among the highest in the world. But broadband access in rural and Indigenous communities still lags. And beyond infrastructure, there's a deeper divide. The information we consume is no longer shared. It's algorithmically isolated. Neighbors live in different digital realities. One sees conspiracy, one sees collapse, one sees nothing at all. The public square has been replaced by filter bubbles. This digital divide isn't just about access. It's about language, literacy, and trust. Seniors struggle to use online government services. Immigrants face language barriers on essential platforms. And millions of Canadians aren't confident navigating digital tools, excluding them from everything from vaccine appointments to housing applications. Inclusion now depends on connectivity and comprehension. And if you don't have both, you're not just behind, you're locked out. Meanwhile, digital platforms are reshaping how we see the world and each other. Political discourse has moved online. So has harassment. Hate speech, disinformation, and rage farming now thrive in algorithmic feedback loops. And while tech companies profit, democracy suffers. Truth becomes optional. Polarization rises, and the nation begins to fracture. Not along physical borders, but ideological ones. The pandemic made this clearer than ever. Misinformation about health, online movements turning into offline protests, fringe narratives gaining mass traction through viral design. We used to argue over facts. Now we argue over reality. And when people can't agree on what's true, they can't agree on what needs fixing. At the same time, digital platforms are replacing real institutions. YouTube becomes the classroom. Reddit becomes the therapist. TikTok becomes the news. And as these platforms become more central, they're governed by private algorithms, not public ethics. Canadians are now shaped more by app updates than by public policy. And no one voted for that. The consequences are everywhere. In classrooms overwhelmed by phones, in political movements born from memes, in mental health crises tied to endless scrolls. We are more informed and more anxious, more connected, and more alone. This isn't a glitch, it's the architecture of modern life, built by profit, lacking in protection. But tech is not the enemy, it's the tool. The question is who controls it, and to what end? Canada needs a digital infrastructure built on access, equity, and accountability. That means universal high-speed internet, digital literacy education, transparent content moderation, and public interest media that competes with and corrects corporate platforms. Otherwise, the algorithms will continue to decide what Canada becomes. The internet once promised a new kind of democracy, one where every voice could count. But without safeguards, it has become a space where noise drowns out nuance, where connection becomes control, and where the fabric of national identity is replaced by 1,000 individual feeds. We don't need to go backward, but we do need to go deliberately forward, toward a digital culture that informs without overwhelming, connects without fracturing, because a country that loses shared understanding will soon lose its shared future. And what begins with disconnection ends in collapse. For 3 hours, we've traced the cracks. In housing, in work, in immigration, in systems, in trust. And now we ask, what comes next? This isn't just a crisis of policy, it's a crisis of imagination. Because the old Canadian story of fairness, security, and upward mobility no longer matches the reality. And the longer we cling to that story, the harder it becomes to write a new one. So what does the new story sound like? First, it tells the truth, that the cost of living is unmanageable, that immigrants are invited in, but not supported, that middle-class life is slipping away, that institutions are overwhelmed, and that despite all this, most people are still trying, still showing up, still building, still hoping, even when they feel alone. The future of Canada cannot be built on silence. It requires confronting inequality with clarity, confronting debt with compassion, confronting exclusion with design, and understanding that systemic problems do not have individual solutions. That's not defeatism, that's realism, and it's where real change begins. We also have to rethink growth, because growth isn't progress unless it lifts people. An expanding GDP means nothing if your rent is 70% of your income. A growing population means nothing if schools, clinics, and housing don't keep pace. A booming tech sector means nothing if half the country lacks digital literacy. Growth without distribution isn't development, it's displacement. Canada's strength has always come from reinvention, from immigrants who built new lives, from Indigenous peoples who endured and led, from workers who organized, from communities that rose after collapse. That spirit is still here, but it needs space, support, leadership that doesn't fear discomfort, and policies that match the ambition of the people. Imagine a Canada where every student graduates without debt, every renter has rights and real protections, every newcomer is integrated, not isolated, every rural family has clean water and broadband, every worker can afford to be sick. None of this is impossible. We are not lacking in resources. We are lacking in resolve. This isn't a call for nostalgia. The past wasn't perfect, but the future can be better if we build it on truth, not slogans. That means rejecting the politics of distraction, naming inequality where we see it, and choosing leadership that answers to people, not markets. Because we're not just in a moment of crisis. We're in a moment of decision. Some will say it's too late, that the systems are too entrenched, the divisions too deep, the costs too high. But nothing about Canada's future is inevitable. It will be shaped by the choices we make now. Not just as voters or workers or consumers, but as neighbors, as citizens, as people who still believe that a country can be more than just an economy. The hardest part of any change is imagining it. So let's imagine a Canada that prioritizes housing as a right, that invests in public systems before private profits, that embraces immigration without outsourcing its impacts, that listens to Indigenous leadership, not just symbolically, but structurally, that values mental health as much as GDP, that stops asking, how do we fix the past? And starts asking, what kind of future are we willing to build together? This documentary isn't the final word. It's a beginning, a mirror, a challenge, and a reminder that Canada is not broken beyond repair. It is not beyond hope. But hope, like progress, requires action. And the first action is to stop pretending, to name what's broken, and commit to fixing it. Not later. Now.